Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit,
the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes.
Okay, now let's get on with the show.
Hello and welcome to The Alternative Exit. Today we're excited to have Matt Hancock. He's a senior consultant at Praxis Consulting Group. Matt brings extensive experience in fostering ownership cultures that are inclusive, resilient, and innovative. His work spans employee-owned companies, labour management partnerships, and non-profits, both across the US and also Europe. And he's had a really strong background in cooperative economics and leadership development. So in this episode, we're going to explore Matt's journey and dive into what is required to integrate continuous improvement into ownership cultures and how companies can unlock the full potential of employee ownership. Matt, welcome to The Alternative Exit.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here. And thanks for that nice introduction. I'd like to say those things about myself someday.
It's the least I could do if you're giving your time to come and speak with the audience today. So, Matt, like your career, obviously it's been across multiple continents, between sort of the US and Italy. You've been obviously getting a lot of different perspectives as you've been working across sort of the work in the cooperative, the work you're doing now of helping people with ESOPs. I mean, how do you think these experiences have shaped your approach to employee ownership today?
Wow. Excellent question. I mean, I think my experiences early on, I sort of lucked into this Italy thing. I've just since I was 18 had a passion for speaking Italian and all things Italian, and I wanted to go live in Italy. And so after my junior year abroad, I decided I was going to enroll in school at the University of Bologna. It has a great reputation, and it's a beautiful city. And that's about all I knew about Bologna when I went there. What I found out just before I moved there was that Bologna is the capital of Emilia-Romagna, the region in Italy, central northern part of the country, and it is the capital of probably the most, at least on a per capita basis, the most important cooperative economy in the world. So more co-ops there per capita than any other place in the world, in all kinds of sectors.
More than Mondragon in Spain.
Yes. Mondragon is important. I don't want to diminish the importance of Mondragon. But in terms of number of co-ops, number of employees, number of part of that is because it's over a much larger land and geographic area. And it's more decentralized. So Mondragon, right, everything kind of rolls up. These are more independent businesses that are joined through several cooperative associations. But agriculture, manufacturing, services, you name it. It's also home to a interesting economic development model built around small, highly skilled, technically competent, small firms in manufacturing that compete and cooperate in these things called flexible manufacturing networks to make really sophisticated things on the world that sell all over the world. So a lot of capital goods. And then, of course, the things that, everyone would know are things like Ferrari, Lamborghini, Ducati, Maserati, prosciutto, mortadella. Those are all things that are from this region. And tying that all together is an interesting political background, but also an interesting role for labor as a partner in shaping what the economy looks like. So I kind of luck into this whole world, and that's really where I got turned on to cooperatives. I studied at the University of Bologna a thing called cooperative economics. So you could think of it as an MBA specifically for people who want to work in cooperatives. And I guess if I had to pick one moment, it was a moment actually. On the one hand, I'm working at a place called the Institute for Labor there, and the whole focus was doing research into participatory forms of work organization, new ways of managing companies. So think about lean Toyota production system, plus, all kinds of ways of leveraging the tacit knowledge, the knowledge that workers have because they're the real experts in the work that they do, leveraging that as a source of innovation and competitive advantage. So I'm learning about participation in lean manufacturing, that kind of stuff. And then I'm also studying cooperatives. And as I'm visiting these cooperatives, I was trained to observe certain things, ask certain questions, to look at how lean a company is. And one of the things that's important to lean is workforce participation. So I'm asking questions about workforce participation, and I'm seeing these very democratic businesses with very little shop floor participation. So you've got this discrepancy between we're electing the board of directors, we're making really big decisions about the direction of the company, but day to day, it's stay in your lane, follow, there's a management structure. And so there were things that private, for-profit, not co-op businesses were doing to engage workers that you weren't seeing in the co-ops. And that discrepancy kind of did set me on my career path, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that is sort of it's a bit of an odd sort of dissonance between that. And it's also, I mean, it's something that you hear a lot when people say, "Hey, look, employee ownership isn't the panacea, doesn't cure everything." I don't know whether it's a cooperative. There still needs to be a really deliberate approach to how you set the company up to really ensure that both the employees and the company really gets the value out of that out of that ownership structure. But that highlight is a sort of, I guess, a really good segue to the next parts of the conversation. And to do that, I'd love to, I think what's going to be really important for people is to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing at Praxis today.
Mm-hmm. So quickly, a little bit about Praxis. I was just lucky to sort of connect with them vis-a-vis Bologna, but Alex Moss, Ginny Vanderslight are the founders of that firm, and the firm's founding comes out of an experience in it was the early to mid 90s in Philadelphia, where employees at what was the A&P supermarket chain that went bankrupt, one of the many times they went bankrupt, decided that they were going to buy the company out, buy a few of the locations out. And so they went from A&P to O&O for owned and operated by the employees. And so our very earliest experiences with employee ownership came out of that. So helping workers figure out, what does it mean to be an owner? What does it mean to democratically manage a business and still have to, turn a profit and meet the budget and compete in the marketplace? So Praxis gets formed in 1995 to provide consulting services to both co-ops and ESOPs. And ESOP is an employee stock ownership plan. It's spreading throughout the world now, but it's a pretty American thing. At least that's the way I think about it, compared to a co-op, that allows a business owner who doesn't want to own that business anymore to sell to the employees without having to ask the employees to put cash up. So you set up a retirement plan. That's what an ESOP is. The company can borrow money to buy out the owner on behalf of the workers, and the workers earn over time shares of stock in that company. And so our whole purpose at Praxis is to help businesses that do that take advantage of the performance potential that comes with sharing ownership. And I say potential because early on, so 1974 is when the ESOP was created by law, by Congress. And early on, there were competing camps. Some people thought this was the worst idea ever. You mean turn workers into owners? You're going to ruin capitalism. And then, of course, there were other people that said, what could be better for these businesses than to make the workers also the owners, so they've got a stake into it. And early on, there was evidence to support both of those camps. Some businesses that put in place an ESOP, believe it or not, they took off. Other businesses that put in place an ESOP had no change, or they did worse than they had been before the ESOP. And so that made the researchers say, wait, what's going on here? Are we both right? That doesn't seem to be the case. So digging deeper, scratching the surface, they found out the differentiator, what set aside a high-performing ESOP from a non-high-performing ESOP, was the culture in the business. Was it a culture of ownership where employees could think, act, and feel like owners? And the foundation for that kind of a culture, and this is backed up by research and we've seen it in our experience, really is the role of leaders, the values, the beliefs, and the behaviors, the kind of an example that leaders set for what it means to show up like an owner. And that's really that intersection there, that equation, ESOP ownership plus ownership culture, work on that ownership culture to help companies realize the performance potential.
Yeah, look, it'd be amazing to be able to dive in more as to like how you define ownership culture and like what and so what are the core elements that are a part of that.
So I think, there's a couple of different maybe levels we could think about it. At a conceptual level, it's what I said. Does an employee in an employee-owned business actually think, feel, and act like owners? Now, the challenge there is that when you tell somebody, congratulations, you're an owner, they're probably thinking of the time I owned a car, the house that I own, my uncle who owns a business, a small privately held business, and it's his personal fiefdom or her personal fiefdom. And so ownership in those contexts means I get to decide if I'm going to change the oil or not in the car. I get to decide. Go ahead.
No, I was about to say, like, not only does it mean, hey, look, I get to decide if I change the oil, but also if I have an accident, I've got to pay, right? I've then got to do all the insurance. Like, and what happens? Yeah, what happens if someone crashes into me? They don't have insurance. So also comes with a lot of fear and like say a little bit of a sidetrack. We'll come back to sort of the ownership culture of ownership, but what happens when people don't want the ownership? Does that happen often?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, that's a great question. I'm not sure if I can sort of answer that with a yes or a no, response. On the one hand, I think very few people show up to a job with an expectation, even an orientation towards ownership. You said when you said insurance, risk, fear. What I started to think about was, if you think about ownership, there's both rights that go along with being an owner. There's also the responsibility. So the rights would be, what color am I going to, paint it? I'm going to make this modification to the car. I'm not much of a gearhead, so if I but there's the rights that go along with ownership, but there's also the responsibility, and that's what you were highlighting. If there's an accident, right, who's liable? I got to deal with those sorts of things. And so an interesting thing happens when you start to talk about employee ownership or ownership in an organization. Frontline employees typically start to think about my rights as an owner. The management typically starts to think about, well, what are your responsibilities as owners? And I think part of what our work is at Praxis is to help bring those together, to integrate rights and responsibilities as two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. So if you've got all rights but no responsibilities, and vice versa, you don't have a healthy ownership culture. So we think about ownership culture in terms of building blocks, as if you're building a house, and that the foundation is leadership, the values and beliefs. So the kinds of intangible things that influence how a leader shows up to work, how a leader interacts, and what's particularly important is how do leaders behave when the going gets tough, when there's stress in the organization, because that's when you get to see, is there consistency? Are they walking the talk or not?
Yeah.
Or actions and words consistent? And that's what employee owners are looking for, is the discrepancy or the alignment between stated beliefs and actions, particularly when the going gets tough. The other building blocks have to do with how people are rewarded within that ownership culture. And so the ESOP is a long-term reward, but what 20-year-old of any generation, I would add, is ever thinking about
Retirement.
when they're 65, retirement. Yeah. So how do you bring that in a little bit closer in range through things like profit sharing, gain sharing, that kind of ties us together in a shared reward, but also intangibles, recognition, the quality of the work, maybe some of the ways that I have more autonomy here than if I were someplace else. Maybe a work environment that allows me to show up as my authentic self. So there's rewards that are tangible, there's rewards that are intangible. There's education that's really important. That's another building block of ownership culture. So employees have to understand, when you say ESOP and employee owner, what does that mean? How did this happen? Open up the hood a little bit and show them how the engine works. Begin to also educate them about how the business works, because ultimately it's the performance of the business that makes the shares more or less valuable that they own. And then education about the different roles in the organization. So one of the shifts that you hope happens is you're going from siloed thinking to more collective team thinking. I have to be aware of who's supplying me within the organization and who I'm supplying and how we work together to satisfy customers. Then there's a particular type of communication. So we're communicating differently. For example, you might be sharing financial information for the first time with employees. And then, of course, the education piece that has to go with that. If you're going to show somebody a profit and loss statement, and you start saying things like PL and EBITDA, you got to teach people what this language is that you're asking them to speak. And that's your scorecard as a business. So they have to, if they're going to play the game more effectively, they have to understand the rules and how to keep score, ultimately so that they can participate differently. So it's not just work harder, work smarter, but we think thinking like an owner means taking ownership over the work that you do. It means having the skills, the knowledge, and the opportunities to improve processes. Because if you can improve processes, you make the business more efficient. And if you're more efficient in delivering higher quality, you're going to have more profit. And more profit means you've got more wealth to share. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to tie this off about ownership culture. Another way to put it is making clear the connection between my actions as an individual employee owner, how the company performs, and the value, the wealth that we're creating and that I'm sharing.
Yeah, that connection there you talked about, I mean, obviously relies on that sort of open book management, right? Like that income statement. Obviously, there's that education that needs to happen, but how much is too much to share, do you think? Is there a line that's too much to share?
That's a great, I'm of a mind that I kind of grew up, with some mentors who said there's really not too much. Maybe don't share individual salary data.
Yeah.
But I know of a good friend who was the CEO of a high involvement employee-owned company in the Midwest of America. So very much heartland of America, traditional values. And they went and they shared everything, including salary ranges at every level. And what he said, so they didn't say, here's what the CEO is making, but the CEO.
Okay, but they gave bands. Like, hey, look, this is,
And he told me, I'll never forget this. Everybody went, oh my gosh, with all that risk, all that responsibility, you're only making that? I wouldn't want that job. So the fear, of course, is, people are going, wait, you're making way too much money. Oftentimes the opposite is true.
Well, we often hear that as well when companies, like, hear that from retiring owners, like, or when they're going to sort of transition and they actually sort of say, hey, look, this is how much we're making. And people look at their business and go, wait a minute, like, you sell this widget for X, you pay us Y, and then you take home Z? That's really small. Why do you even do this?
Yep. That's one of the most fun moments in business and financial literacy education, when you say, okay, here's how much we made, last year, and this is our profit. And usually there's two like big numbers, but then we say, okay, let's take a look at this construction project that you worked on, or let's take a look at this product, this one unit of product that you produce that sells for $100, and the pennies on the dollar that you end up with as profit after, going through the cost of goods and selling and general expenses, and giving people a sense of all the claims on the value that we create before it gets to whoever the owner is.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge penny drop for a lot of people. That's sort of how you hear those and helps them identify those opportunities. So,
but can I say the flip side of that is because we're talking not about profit sharing, that might be part of the goal, but we're talking about wealth creation. And so one of the fun things that you can do when you talk about how do you determine the value of a company, you could talk about a multiple of profit, of earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So I'll save $1 through a process improvement or through, using less materials to produce something or less rework. That dollar increases your profit margin by $1. But in terms of the wealth, that can be multiplied 2, 5, 10 times. And so all of a sudden, $100 is 500, $1,000 is 5,000. And so people begin to see that connection. It might seem like small change today, but you do that process every single day, multiple times a day, and that's how you create real wealth.
Yeah, that's awesome. It reminds me. It's a really good sort of focus for that education is sort of moving beyond. Hey, look, just what's the bottom line to what does it mean for you guys in the business? So you talked about just that last piece, small little bits of iteration, improvement over time can have that large impact for the business. What are some of the things that you've helped company, like the actual processes that you've helped a company implement to adopt those more sort of lean, continuous improvement practices that have brought that input power of employee ownership to the light?
I wish I had my client's chart. He was recently challenged by his board of directors. We spent so much money on this continuous improvement thing. What are we getting out of it? And he said, I couldn't wait to do that board presentation because he's got a chart that shows the investment made in continuous improvement. So, doing things like paying consultants, but also the full-time equivalent employees who are dedicated to that. And then the cumulative savings over time, of taking cost out or of taking time and therefore cost out of things like going and winning new business. And so the board, had to sort of sit on their hands and say, okay, keep up with the continuous improvement. Because it is a significant upfront cost because you're paying for training, you're paying for people to focus on it. But continuous improvement is all about taking the resources that you have now and multiplying those resources to do the work that you do more efficiently at higher quality, but also freeing up resources to do additional improvement projects. So it's kind of a snowball effect. And this company that I'm thinking about is probably a good example for the answer to your question. It was a sort of a high-tech company in an old industry. So boutique, corporate, and bank-owned life insurance policies. And they do so it's kind of the stodgy, right? I mean, we're talking about insurance, but they're doing the technology solutions that allow brokers to price plans. They're doing things that allow third-party administrators to keep track of the insurance policy. So database and programming and web design kind of stuff. They had for a number of years they had a small ESOP. So the ESOP owned a small percentage of the company. It was kind of there waiting in the wings when the majority owners were ready to sell.
Yeah.
And so this company said, okay, how do we we're going to go to 100% ESOP owned, 100% employee ownership. How do we make employees really feel that ownership like it's real? Because the reward is going to be so far down the road, right? 20, 30 years. And for them, the answer was integrating continuous quality improvement into their culture. So helping people have a sense of ownership over the work that they do by the ability to working as part of a team to make improvements to the way we do work. So, my colleague was a mentor of mine. He likes to call it helping people have more of a craft mentality over the work they do. So Henry Ford and Frederick Taylor with the Industrial Revolution did lots of wonderful things that allowed us to start producing a whole bunch of stuff on a mass scale. So I don't want to knock mass production and scientific management too much, but what it did is it eliminated any sense of work as a craft, right? You could plug me into the assembly line and with minimal training, have me up and doing the same repetitive motion task over and over. And, for a long time, that was really important. And at some point that stopped working, particularly when you had, the Japanese starting to make, high quality cars, lower costs, quicker time to market. And then think about, telling people, congratulations, you're an owner now. Now get back to doing that repetitive, brain numbing work.
Well, it just misses the whole value. It misses the whole value of what that person could deliver and bring to the job. I mean, one of the earlier guests that we had is John Abrams from Southern Mountain. Yeah, so he talked about sort of cathedral builders and let's build things that last the test of time, which is amazing. And and then I don't know. So you also talk about the great game of business, and he talked a lot in that story about how he'd just been doing management all wrong and leaving all this value sitting on the shop floor because he wasn't actually speaking to these incredibly intelligent people. So it's also leaving not really getting the value out of your greatest and probably one of the most expensive assets.
Exactly. And that's right. That becomes then your secret weapon in terms of innovation, in terms of speed, in terms of retention of employees.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll leave the Industrial Revolution behind in 10 seconds, but I think, they saw that it as an either or. You can either have people feeling like craftspeople, or you could have efficiency. And of course, we know that that's not true. You can have both, and something like continuous improvement allows you to integrate both of those things and tap that resource that you're talking about in that way.
Well, I wish we did leave that behind with the Industrial Revolution, but I think that's a large part of modern leadership. I think a lot of people will sit there and they'll go do an MBA, and in that MBA you'll go to Management 101 and they'll say, hey, look, you got to treat your people like a human, like a unique person that we've got to help and support and go through that. And then they'll go into the economics or the finance part of it, where they sit there and talk about, yeah, but we've got to squeeze labor costs. And I find that of those two classes, the squeezing the labor costs is the one that comes out sort of the most prominent, right? Because it's the easiest thing for people to do, right? It's binary. So I still think we're stuck in very much that whole command and control hangover from that Industrial Revolution.
That's a great hangover. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you said binary, and it makes me, sort of think, we inherited this way of thinking about, like a dualistic way of thinking about the world and a mechanistic way of thinking about organizations, when in reality, organizations are more like a living, breathing organism. An ecosystem that we can influence, but it's not input to output. It's a lot more complex than that, whether you admit it or not. A lot of resistance to change, a lot of, cost in terms of time, in terms of money, I think comes from trying to impose a machine model onto something that's more like an ecosystem or a living, breathing organism.
So helping companies make that transition, from that's effectively what you guys do in a lot of in some instances. Like you're coming in with an organization that has not been employee owned, right? Ownership goes, hey, look, there needs to be a better way. And you're going, yeah, okay, but to be successful, there's a heavy lift that we need to do to ensure that you are successful in this new ownership paradigm. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've got in helping those companies make that transition?
I think we can go back to my high-tech client in the low-tech insurance industry, and forgive my insurance colleagues for me describing that. That's not exactly the frame I'm looking at, but there's this neat dichotomy between the high-tech work and this older, industry that's been around since. Anyway, so they said, how do we make ownership come alive for people outside of here's a retirement plan? And for them, the answer was continuous quality improvement. And so what we started with was educating.
How do they come to that? No employee is coming up and saying, hey, I know what's going to make me feel like more an owner, and that's continuous improvement, baby. People just don't say that. So how did that come about? Was it a process of education of hey, this is how some people feel more involved with the business? You guys going to be owners, great. Here are some levers that you can pull to feel more engaged. Yeah, you could talk us through that, sort of the early parts of that.
In this case, and this illustrates why we put leadership as the foundation of the building blocks.
Yeah.
It was the vision of the CEO. He had some experience with quality improvement. And he actually elevated a project manager in his organization. She became his direct report on continuous quality improvement. So he signaled to the rest of the leadership team and the organization how important this was to him.
Yeah.
And there's this great turn of phrase. You usually say, I'll believe it when I see it. But with things like culture change, you'll see it when you believe it. Like, you've got to lead with the belief and induce that change, I think. And so he just said, there's no other way we're going to do this. And he didn't say, though, so here's what it looks like. He recruited people who were excited by that vision to a cause, to a campaign. He created a committee, and we used John Cotter's model change.
Yeah.
One of which is creating a coalition. And so there were people that were excited about becoming 100% employee owned, excited about the idea of maybe we're going to shift to something different beyond command and control. And they liked the idea that this was going to make ownership more real, but they didn't know what it looked like and what it was. So we went through a number of different stages, starting actually with baseline education on what is an ESOP. How did you become employee owned? So we showed them how they bought out the owners.
Okay.
We explained to them how they're going to be able to get stock over time. And we went through some of the nitty-gritty details, how it works as a benefit plan. And what we left them with, though, was let's talk about this valuation process. Every year, you're going to have an outside independent appraiser take a look at your business. What's that process look like? And if you want to make this worth more, what can you do? And that was the entree into continuous improvement. We can sell more of our product, and that'll contribute right marginally to increasing our profit margin. But if you can figure out how to improve quality, reduce costs, that's all going to the bottom line. And that, what we were talking about before, was in that multiplier effect. So the next step was business and financial literacy, so that everybody understood not just their piece of the business and how the business as a whole worked. And that's something that, it's often, I wonder, do leaders maybe take for granted the level of understanding about the organization as a whole? People really don't have that kind of visibility because they haven't ever been brought up or trained. And in fact, oftentimes encouraged to be silent.
Yeah, I think a big part is, there's a lot of assumption that they're sort of these leaders, like, assume, oh yeah, of course they know what's happening over there. But there's also and I don't want to tell them any more than what they already know, because that could be dangerous. Like, there's a lot of people like keeping things close to their chest. So yeah, like that education of those fundamentals and having a leader who believes in that makes so much sense. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of things that you guys implemented to really bring this continuous improvement to life, or that they implemented with your support. But it'd be great to know. So because I'm sure not everyone could just go and run at continuous improvement, and just go do that. So what are some of the ways that you did that were implemented that really drove that change in culture?
Well, I want to start answering the question by coming back to the leadership piece, because we spent a lot, there's a temptation to treat continuous improvement as a fundamentally a technical problem. So let's just do Kanban. Let's just do 5S, because Toyota did that and that was successful. We spent a lot of time up front in leadership development with leaders at all levels to talk about things like empathy, things like active listening, things like interest-based problem solving, asking effective questions. Because what we're trying to do is, number one, help leaders come into touch with what it feels like to be somebody who's at the bottom of the org chart, who doesn't have the same visibility and autonomy that you do. What does that feel like? Leaders, I think, take for granted that they're going to get listened to. I mean, they get listened to. And so they have a hard time of getting in touch with what does it feel like to not feel heard, seen, and respected. So we did a lot of investment with them in these, things that you might legitimately call soft skills.
Yeah.
That really are the requirement for continuous improvement being something that's more than just the flavor of the month, or more than just an improvement cycle that we have on the wall that we could say we did it, checkbox. So that was the foundational piece for us, was helping the employees understand the business, helping leaders, and leaders have to really come to grips with maybe they're giving up some core parts of their identities.
Totally. This can't be easy for a lot of leaders and owners as well. I mean, this has got to be a big core belief shift for some. And I'm sure some would struggle. But I mean, how long does this transformation take?
I think you're looking at really, a 2 to 3 year period, and then probably, it'll take 5 years for you to know that it's really taken hold and it's going to be sustainable. But I would say thinking, if you're getting something started around a culture change effort where the expected goal is people are going to think, feel, and fundamentally act differently, you got to invest 2 to 3 years in the startup phase of that.
Yeah.
So then what we did is we said, let's train people now in the technical side of continuous improvement. So we've learned about how do we interact differently, how do we communicate differently, how do we solve problems differently. What are some of the tools of continuous improvement? And these are things that would be familiar to people who've been around a factory or read about the Toyota production system. So how do you use an improvement methodology like plan, do, study, act, which means people start to think more like scientists.
Yeah.
Then we would teach some of those skills. We would teach in the context of the improvement methodology, right? So we use a thing called the A3 chart, which takes plan, do, study, act, and maps it out on a 11 by 17 piece of paper. And the biggest box is plan. It's not do and it's not act, because the point is, the way we've been brought up is I see a problem, I solve it. Yeah. And we get rewarded for being able to solve problems quickly. And what we're saying here is, how do you slow things down? How do we fully understand the problem? How do we do things like root cause analysis? And then how do you, by pulling in different stakeholders and having a different way of talking about problems, how do you open up to multiplying options? So it's not just about your idea and my idea, and let's hash out whose idea is the best idea. It's let's figure out what ideas we're not even thinking about yet.
Yeah.
And we like to teach people, I mentioned interest-based problem solving. What we like to teach people is the language of interests. And so as we think about this particular problem from multiple stakeholder perspectives, what are the people affected by this problem and potential change? What do they care about? What are their hopes? What are their fears? And so then all of a sudden you can start to turn the resistance that you experience to change into a source of energy for the change, because you're saying, you know what? Whatever solution we come up with has to also meet these interests. So we're teaching these sorts of things. And then we're setting up, the leaders in the organization really are setting up some opportunities to try it out, to pilot. What does it look like to, on a small scale, identify a problem, develop a hypothesis, test it, evaluate, did that change result in an improvement? And then you could talk about how do you sustain it and how do you scale it up. So the first step is trying it out with people who are really enthusiastic about it, like people who are over on this side of the bell curve, not on this side of the bell curve. And then it's how do you work with leaders to say, okay, we've got this bottom up momentum around, okay, we've got more ownership over the work we do, but we need leaders also to say, what would really matter for the organization as a whole if we could improve here? And so it might be, in this case, they tackled things like fixing bugs in software in a more efficient way, but they also figured out how to go and develop estimates for new customers that were more accurate and less costly in terms of time. And so they could be in front of a whole bunch of more customers than they once were able to be. And the acquisition costs went way down as well.
Yeah. Okay. And so in terms of the identifying, like, were they leveraging sort of that employee ownership owned community to identify those opportunities, and then just and did they pull them together and then sort of decide, hey, look, these ones we're going to tackle? I mean, how did that work?
Yeah, there's all sorts of sort of answers to that or solutions to that that problem. In this case, it was both the continuous improvement committee that I talked about, that coalition. You know, they were inviting employees to come forth with ideas, you know, things that are headaches in your work, and then they developed some criteria to determine. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with the impact and effort, you know, matrix. And so, if this is going to have a low impact and require lots of effort, let's not focus on that. Let's look at the ones that are going to have a high impact. And, you know, if it's low effort, then it's probably something that you can do within your team. If it's
Yep.
something that requires more resources, then there's a process for involving management. But there's also a process where in the annual operational planning cycle of an organization, not only are they setting goals, we want to sell this much more, we want to have this much more profit, but what are the specific ways that the organization has to improve in order to do so? And so that becomes, you know, part of a top down in a positive way of improvement. Where we're saying, you know what, we've seen this problem over here. What's your best thinking about how to make those improvements? Am I giving enough definition of?
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, I think you're painting a picture of, you're painting a really sort of accurate picture of what it takes to be able to make these changes throughout the organization. Like, it's a mix of top down, bottoms up. Like, and also I think the part that I really appreciate that you're highlighting it is that just like when you're dealing with any humans, this isn't flicking a switch. This is a journey that we need to go on. And I think that that's what like a lot of people really need to understand as you're making this. I mean, and this is analogous for this journey towards employee ownership that people need to do. Like it does need to be a journey so that people can sort of feel comfortable with what is ultimately could be a really uncomfortable experience for a lot of people. And I think this has been an amazing part of the for people to take away. But we've been having a great conversation, but I'd like to finish us off with a fast round of questions. I'm just going to ask you 3 questions, and you offer a quick response. How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay, like who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Who is the leader that I most admire in employee ownership? Wow, that's a really great question. This is supposed to be a lightning round, isn't it?
Yeah. The answer could be lightning. I could have some thinking music for you, but
I think I do need some thinking music, and I'm thinking like but I do want to. Let me go back to this kooky guy named Lou Kelso. So he's not somebody who's running a company today, but you know he had this intuition about ESOP, and it sounded like a crazy idea, and he just wouldn't stop until he ended up at Congress and getting it, ensconced in law.
Yeah, Lou's. It's not the first time we've heard Lou Kelso. So yeah, that's a great one. And what is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
Well, my favorite resource is it's a little bit easier for me to do this, but you know I can just ping Alex Moss at Praxis Consulting Group really easily and pick his brain on just about any topics.
That's all right. We'll just invite everyone to do that too.
Flood his inbox. ESOPinfo.org, I would say, if there's one place to start, is go to ESOPinfo.org.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the last one to round us out. What would you say to a business owner who is sitting on the fence with regards to employee ownership?
I would talk to him about why he should not do an ESOP. And you know, you should not do an ESOP if you are not willing to if you're not willing to invite employee owners to take up a different role, and they still have their job to do, but to take up a different role within the organization to be able to approach their work differently. If you're not willing to begin to share more than you are right now, and if you don't have confidence in the people within the organization right now, this is not a great bet to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
And I would probably close out, and then this is a little bit unfair, but if you don't care about the legacy that you're leaving behind, don't you clear?
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that one. I would like to challenge that. The last one, you second last, where you said, if you don't have the confidence in your employees, I find that that's something I've heard a lot. Like where people leaders go, no, I don't think my employees could do it. I don't think they could handle they won't be able to sort of deal with the P&L. They won't be able to understand sort of what it means to think in an owner. I find a lot of people underestimate what their employees can do and overestimate what they do.
Yeah, well, so if that's really the problem, then I have a solution. You just need to either become immortal or clone yourself. And so since we can't do that, let's remember that the human beings in your organization are fundamentally the same as the human beings in all these high-performing organizations. And the difference is things like education, opportunity, support to step up into those roles. So don't mean to be facetious. We're working with human beings who have the same limits and the same potential as all the other human beings. And there's an awful lot of businesses that have been able to take that leap. Now, it's not like flicking a switch, to your point earlier. There's a transition process. That's a process that people can step up into, and you might need outside help. You might need outside help from somebody like us. That might also mean you need to bring somebody onto your board who has a different perspective, or you might need to think about, do we need a new CEO, to help this team reach their potential?
That's brilliant. So, Matt, thank you so much for your time and the great conversation today. Look, where can people find you if they want to follow along your journey or learn a little bit more about the work you're doing in Praxis?
Check us out at praxiscg.com. The G is for Consulting Group. Yep. You could find me on LinkedIn. That's the only social media you'll find me on, but I do like to interact there. And then, especially in the United States, there's a ton of opportunities through the National Center for Employee Ownership, the ESOP Association, the state centers for employee ownership. They do these wonderful conferences, which are just great networking opportunities. And it's one of the few places where competitors can talk to each other, and there's a willingness to share and a willingness to be open. So hopefully, we can connect one of those opportunities.
Fantastic. Matt, thank you very much for joining us on The Alternative Exit.
Thanks, Andy.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.